before pyramids pierced the Egyptian sky, and before Babylon's gates shimmered beneath the desert sun. A different power emerged from the dust Sumer. From the flat, fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers rose the world's first known civilization, seemingly sudden and complete, not just with cities and agriculture, but with law, architecture, astronomy, and most astonishing of all, writing. Their legacy endures in clay, tens of thousands of brittle tablets etched in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script that would become the voice of gods, kings, and everyday life. But hidden among these dusty records lies one document that defies every logical explanation, the Sumerian King List. Preserved most fully on the Weld Blundell prism, this four-sided artifact doesn't simply recount rulers. It tells of a time when kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, before a great flood swept across the world and reset human history. Before we continue, take a second to support the channel. Hit that subscribe button to join us on more journeys into the secrets of the ancient world. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and the current time. It's always amazing to see this global community uncovering ancient mysteries together. And if this story already has you intrigued, share the video with someone who'd appreciate the idea that kings once ruled for 36,000 years. Let's see who among us is already beginning to understand the deeper mystery behind the title. The King List opens not with the mundane, but with something profound, even cosmic. When kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu. That one line upends all modern ideas of government and sovereignty. To the Sumerians, rule wasn't earned or seized, it was granted from above, a divine force imposed upon earth. The first city to receive this heavenly kingship was Eridu, a sacred settlement near modern-day Abu Shahrain in southern Iraq. And what follows in the list of rulers sounds more like scripture than record. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, is said to have ruled for 800 years. His successor, Alalga, reigned for 36,000, and others Enmen Luana, Enmengal-ana, Dumuzid the shepherd are recorded with reigns so impossibly long that they stretch the imagination beyond myth. 8 kings rule in succession before the text arrives at the fulcrum of history. Then the flood swept over. Be poor sting. To modern ears, these figures are absurd. But this isn't a case of simple exaggeration. For over a century, scholars have debated the purpose of these enormous lifespans. Some argue they're symbolic, exaggerations meant to frame these kings as godlike, legitimizing future dynasties by connecting them to divine rulers. Others, however, look deeper. When converted into lunar months or correlated with celestial phenomena, these reigns begin to align with known astronomical cycles, the 26,000-year precession of Earth's axis, Venus's synodic cycle, the ideal 360-day solar year. In this interpretation, the King List transforms from political mythology into a kind of encoded astronomical chronicle, mapping celestial rhythms through dynastic reigns. The numbers, then, aren't lifespans at all. They're mathematical expressions of time, ritual, and cosmic memory. A way to encode the movement of the heavens into a narrative structure accessible to both priest and scribe. This strange blending of fact, number, and myth continues in the very structure of the King List itself. Though the Weld Blundell prism is the most complete version, at least 18 variants have been found across Mesopotamia, written in both Sumerian and Akkadian. These versions differ, slightly names shift. Reigns change, but the core structure remains. Divine rule, kingship before the flood, and the re-emergence of kingship in cities like Kish and Uruk. The consistency suggests a deep cultural memory being preserved and reshaped with each new dynasty. Rulers across centuries copied the list to claim legitimacy, tying themselves back to the mythical kings of Eridu. In this way, the King List became not just a historical account, but a living document, updated like sacred scripture, repurposed to serve the politics of the present while preserving the mystique of the past. Yet archaeology lends an eerie weight to the legend. At Eridu, the city where kingship first descended, excavations revealed not just ruins, but layer after layer of sacred architecture. 18 distinct levels of temples, stacked one atop the other, each aligned with celestial patterns. The oldest of these temples dates to around 400 BC. Thousands of years before writing appeared, the people of Eridu, even before scribes existed, were already building structures to mirror the movements of stars and seasons. If the Sumerians believed heaven's rule touched earth here, it may not have been poetic metaphor. It might have been the memory of a real transformation. A moment when order emerged from chaos, inscribed first in stone and later in clay. Then comes the flood. That ominous line in the King List, then the flood swept over, divides the world into before and after. For centuries, this was thought to be pure myth, a story born of riverine cultures dealing with seasonal flooding. But in the 1,920 seconds, archaeologists at Shurupak uncovered something extraordinary: a thick, water-laid layer of silt, sandwiched between two cultural levels. Beneath it, a civilization full of homes, pottery, and tools. Above it, a new society. Radiocarbon dating placed the flood at around 900 BC, strikingly close to the period that divides the antediluvian and post-diluvian kings. Similar flood layers have been found at Ur, Kish, and even Uruk. Not every site shows the same date or scale, suggesting these were not a single worldwide flood, but devastating regional events seared into collective memory. Still, the match is enough to suggest that what the Sumerians recorded in myth, they first experienced in flesh and mud. Flood stories, of course, are not unique to Sumer. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Akkadian Atrahasis epic and the biblical tale of Noah, ancient texts across the Near East repeat the same pattern: a divinely sent flood, a chosen survivor, an ark, and a renewal. These stories differ in tone and detail, but not in essence. They all preserve the idea of cosmic reset, a cleansing followed by rebirth. Some researchers propose that these myths preserve echoes of much earlier cataclysms, like the sea level rise at the end of the Younger Dryas around 600 BC, when melting glaciers submerged coastlines and reconfigured the world's rivers. In this interpretation, the vast ages before the flood, 28800, 36000, 43200 years might encode not human lives, but geological epochs, each king a symbol of an era, each reign a placeholder for a cosmic cycle, disrupted by cataclysm and then renewed. But the King List is not all myth. Some of the post-flood kings it records Etana of Kish, Lugalbanda, and most famously Gilgamesh of Uruk appear in other independently verified texts. Their names are stamped on bricks, carved into statues, or recorded in temple archives. This mix of legendary reign lengths and historical evidence creates a paradox. The Sumerians didn't separate myth from history, as we do. To them, cosmic order flowed into political structure. A king could be both man and god, fact and symbol. The tablets didn't try to distinguish, they wove it all into one unbroken story, and modern science is helping to read that story more closely than ever before. Laser scanning of the Weld-Blundell prism reveals corrections and erasures made by different scribes over generations. The tablet is not static, it is palimpsest. Memory overwritten with memory. Dynasties came and went, but each one added its own hand to the tablet, linking itself back to that first line. When kingship descended from heaven, with takespec and stalls that taked of Hezi, we are left with questions more profound than answers. Why record lifespans of 36,000 years unless they meant something beyond mere years? Why describe rulers with such cosmic reverence if they were mere mortals? The answer may lie in the Sumerians' worldview itself, a cosmos ordered by number, time, and celestial movement. A world where kingship was not just governance, but the embodiment of divine harmony on earth. Numbers were the language of the gods, and the scribes who etched them into clay were not just record keepers, but interpreters of that divine order. Perhaps the king who ruled for 200 years, was never meant to be understood as a man at all. Perhaps he was a symbol, a code, a cipher for something so vast it could only be inscribed in eternity. And if that's true, then the King List is not a list of kings, it's a chronicle of the stars, a memory of floods, and a bridge between mortal dust and celestial fire, rising like mountains forged from clay. The Ziggurats of ancient Sumer still haunt the flat plains of southern Iraq. Even in ruin, they command awe. The great Ziggurat of Ur, built over 4,000 years ago, towers above the desert like a monument to forgotten gods. With its massive mud brick terraces stacked layer upon layer, it appears to modern eyes as an impressive but comprehensible feat of early engineering. Yet to the Sumerians, this was no mere building. It was a cosmic ladder, a vertical bridge linking heaven, earth, and the underworld. In its shadow, kings were crowned, rituals performed, destinies shaped, but the Ziggurats' most startling secrets lie not in its height, but in its precision, in its alignments, ratios, and blueprints etched in clay tablets and preserved in museums are hidden truths that modern archaeologists and astronomers are only beginning to decode. Constructed around 2100 BC by King Ur-Nammu, the ziggurat at Ur was dedicated to Nana, the moon god. Its choice of deity was anything but arbitrary. The moon regulated more than the tides, it governed time, agriculture, ritual, and even kingship. The ziggurat's very foundations reflect this lunar reverence. Its base measured 60 by 60, a deliberate invocation of the Sumerian base 6-0 system that structured their mathematics, timekeeping, and astronomical models. The three-tiered structure was more than aesthetic. Each level mirrored the cosmic hierarchy, the heavens above, the human world in the middle, and the Abzu, the watery underworld, below. Tablets describe rituals performed at each level, suggesting that the priests ascended and descended as part of a symbolic journey through the universe, reenacting the path of the sun and moon across sky and underworld. But the ziggurat wasn't just symbolic, it was functional. Its stairways, platforms, and corners were aligned with extraordinary accuracy to the cardinal points. Surveys show that many ziggurats were oriented within a fraction of a degree of true north. These weren't random orientations, they were observatories. Using sightlines and shadow tracking, priests could measure solstices, equinoxes, and lunar standstills. The 6-year lunar cycle, in which the moon's rising and setting points shift along the horizon, could be tracked from temple rooftops using these alignments. The ziggurat became a calendar in architecture, allowing generations of skywatchers to predict eclipses and seasonal changes without needing written equations, just stone, shadow, and sky. Ziggurats across Mesopotamia share these features. At Uruk, temples were aligned to capture the sunrise on the summer solstice. At Nippur, ancient blueprints instruct builders to align temple walls to the place where the sun turns back. These weren't vague instructions, they were astronomical commands. And they weren't isolated discoveries. The architectural ratios, the relationships between width, height, and tiers are consistent across hundreds of miles, suggesting a standardized canon of sacred geometry. Where did this knowledge come from? One explanation is that Sumerian priests observed the heavens over centuries, accumulating astronomical data, refining alignments, and passing it orally through temple schools. Another possibility is more unsettling, that this knowledge was inherited, that from the beginning, from the earliest temples at Eridu and beyond, the alignments were already perfect. Excavations at Eridu revealed not one temple but 18, built atop one another like sedimentary memory. The oldest, dating to 400 BC, predates writing itself by 3 millennia. Yet even this first temple is oriented to the heavens, aligned to the same cardinal directions as ziggurats built to. 000 years later, it incorporates the same division of space into tripartite cosmic realms. This continuity suggests not innovation, but preservation, an ancient pattern carried forward generation after generation. Whether that pattern was purely Sumerian or inherited from an even older, lost culture is a question no one can answer. But the temples themselves seem to speak. This knowledge is ancient, sacred, unchanging. Modern technology is now uncovering details invisible to the naked eye. High-resolution laser scans of ziggurat walls reveal micro-alignments, subtle shifts in staircase angles, and decorative motifs that mirror lunar progressions and solstice markers. The brickwork contains embedded ratios consistent with base 6-0 mathematics. In some cases, even the placement of wall niches and drainage channels correspond to star positions or phases of the moon. These structures were not only built to last, they were built to teach, to calculate, to initiate. They functioned as observatories, calculators, and sacred classrooms wrapped in sun-dried brick. But their deepest meaning was cosmological. The Sumerians envisioned the universe as a 3-layered system. At the top was An, the realm of the sky gods. In the middle was Ki, the earth, where humans toiled. Beneath it lay the Abzu, the watery abyss ruled by Enki, god of wisdom and creation. The ziggurat physically represented this structure. To climb, it was to ascend through the cosmos. Each ritual, each prayer, each sacrifice performed on its tiers was a reenactment of the journey from the mortal world to the divine. The priests didn't merely worship, they walked through sacred space that embodied their theology. Rituals followed cosmic time. At dawn, priests climbed the Ziggurats' eastern staircase, moving from darkness into light, from the Abzu to An. At dusk, they descended into shadow, enacting the sun's nightly death. These movements weren't metaphor, they were sacred theatre, embedding astronomy into daily life. Even the materials mattered. The foundations, buried in the earth, symbolized water and chaos. The middle bricks, sun-dried and weathered, represented mortal toil. The uppermost shrine, often painted in lapis blue, stood for the heavens. The entire structure became a map of the universe, accessible only through ritual motion and divine alignment. Yet the Ziggurats' power extended beyond symbolism. It ordered time, the movement of stars, the planting of crops, the rise of kings. These were all regulated by temple astronomers working from the heights of Ziggurats. Every festival, every tax cycle, every construction project followed calendars observed from their summits. Kings relied on temple scribes to interpret omens and dictate auspicious days. This knowledge wasn't speculative. It was measured, recorded, passed down, and it conferred power, not just religious authority, but practical control over time, labor, and society. Some scholars speculate that Ziggurats also served defensive or economic purposes, but their cosmic role overshadows all others. They were the axis mundi, the world's axis, anchoring the divine above to the human below. In myths, gods descended on Ziggurats. In rituals, humans ascended. The space in between the summit platform became a meeting ground, a doorway. The word ziggurat itself derives from the Akkadian zikuratu, meaning to rise high, but to the Sumerians, it meant something more, a place where heaven and earth spoke the same language, a language of brick, light, and number, and perhaps most provocative of all are the tablets that describe temple building as it was done in the first days. They don't speak of innovation, but of restoration. Temple builders weren't inventing, they were recreating patterns established at the beginning of time. The blueprints were sacred, eternal. The act of building was not merely architectural, it was cosmological maintenance, an effort to keep the world aligned with the divine order. To build a ziggurat was to preserve the balance of the universe. In this light, the ziggurats become more than ruins. They are fossilized prayers, frozen in clay. They are encoded knowledge, waiting to be read not just as structures but as texts. And their alignment, always watching the stars, reminds us that the Sumerians built not just to survive, but to understand. They didn't just raise walls to the sky, they built stairways to eternity. In 1853, amid the sun-scorched ruins of ancient Nineveh, British archaeologist Hormuzd Rassam uncovered a royal library unlike anything seen before. Inside the crumbled remains of Assyrian king Ashurbanipal's palace were rooms filled with clay tablets, thousands of them, shelved like books, inscribed in the dense wedge marks of cuneiform. Among them was a story so rich, so layered, and so enduring that its hero would rise from dust to legend, the epic of Gilgamesh. Etched in 12 tablets in Akkadian, the narrative tells of gods and monsters, journeys beyond death, and the aching hunger for immortality. For decades, scholars dismissed it as myth and ancient fantasy. But the sands of Uruk, Gilgamesh's own city, had a surprise in store. Inscriptions found at Uruk revealed that Gilgamesh was no mere myth. He was real. a ruler around 2700 BC. His name appeared on bricks, temple dedications, and most critically, on the Sumerian King List itself. Suddenly, the story changed. This was not just a tale, it was a layered memory, a fusion of history, theology, and cosmic observation wrapped in mythic narrative. Gilgamesh became a bridge, part human, part god, part king, part constellation. His story, once entertainment, became something far more significant, a window into how the Sumerians saw time, power, and the stars above. The epic opens in the bustling, walled city of Uruk. Gilgamesh is a powerful, restless king, 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, a formula that already suggests balance and division, the interplay of opposites. His early tyranny compels the gods to send him a rival and friend, Enkidu, a wild man crafted from clay. Their friendship transforms Gilgamesh, and their adventures begin. Together, they defeat Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, and kill the bull of heaven sent by the spurned goddess Inanna. These events are epic in form, but they are also celestial in structure. Modern scholars have uncovered something startling. The entire epic may double as an astronomical allegory. The battle with Humbaba, guardian of the forest, mirrors the movement of the sun through the dense forest of stars near the galactic center. The slaying of the bull of heaven aligns with the zodiacal age of Taurus, which spanned from about 4000 to 2000 BC, precisely when the earliest versions of the epic began circulating. In that era, Taurus marked the spring equinox, and the bull was a dominant symbol in many ancient cultures. The killing of the bull could signify the transition to a new age. After Enkidu dies, the story darkens. Gilgamesh, shattered by grief, embarks on a desperate quest to overcome death. His path leads him through mythic landscapes that echo cosmic truths. He reaches Mount Mashu, the twin-peaked mountain where the sun rises and sets. Guarded by terrifying scorpion men, they open the gate to a tunnel of total darkness, a journey of 12 leagues. 12 leagues, 12 hours of night, 12 zodiac signs. This is not just a path of the dead, it's the sun's nightly journey through the underworld. In this mythic geography, the physical world merges with the heavens. Gilgamesh, a mortal, walks where stars rise and fall. Emerging from the tunnel, Gilgamesh finds a jeweled garden, a land where trees bear lapis lazuli and carnelian stones, sacred in Sumerian ritual and found in their burials. This glittering paradise represents the night sky itself, constellations imagined as fruit hanging on divine branches. He sails across the cosmic ocean to meet Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood. Utnapishtim recounts the flood story, a tale echoed in the epic of Atrahasis and later the Book of Genesis. A divine warning, a boat, animals saved, the flood that ends a world and begins another. What the Sumerians preserved as myth, geology now confirms as memory. Around 2900 BC, a catastrophic flood devastated Shuruppak and other cities, marking a sharp cultural break that lines up with the King List's post-flood kings. When Gilgamesh finally asks for the secret to eternal life, Utnapishtim tells him that it is beyond reach. Instead, he offers a plant that restores youth, found at the bottom of the cosmic waters. But on the return journey, a serpent steals it, Immortality slips away, defeated. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, not as a conqueror of death, but as a man transformed by grief, wisdom, and humility. He climbs the city walls and sees what he has built: stone, order, memory. He realizes that legacy, not immortality, is what endures. He is mortal, yes, but in memory, in myth, he becomes eternal. The genius of the Epic of Gilgamesh lies in its layers. It is story, yes, but it is also astronomy. It is ritual. It is theology. It is a manual for life and death, for power and loss, for the cycle of stars and seasons. When read alongside the tablets of omens, star charts, and temple blueprints, it becomes clear that the Sumerians did not see myth and science as opposites. To them, the sky was story, and story was sky. Constellations were characters, planetary cycles were divine dramas. Each journey, told by priests and scribes, reflected real celestial movement observed over centuries from temple rooftops. The enduring power of the Gilgamesh epic is not just its narrative, but its function. It was copied, translated, and preserved in Hittite, Babylonian, Assyrian, and even Hurrian languages. Fragments appear as far west as Canaan and as far north as Anatolia for over 2,000 years. It was recited by priests, memorized by students, and invoked by kings. For Sumerians and their cultural heirs, Gilgamesh was not a character in a book. He was a cosmic archetype, a vessel of knowledge, a mirror of the sun itself, rising, blazing, fading, returning. And in that pattern, he offered hope, not of immortality, but of legacy, not of escaping death, but of transcending it through what one builds, remembers, and records. Even today, the Epic of Gilgamesh remains the oldest story ever written down. Its words, baked into clay, have outlasted empires, languages, and even the cities that birthed them. And what those tablets whisper across time is this: the human desire to understand the cosmos, to conquer death, to find meaning in grief that has never changed. The stars still move as they did when Gilgamesh walked beneath them, and we, like him, still look up, still wonder, still write. Among the many treasures buried in Sumerian clay are tablets unlike the rest. Not administrative ledgers or religious hymns, not astronomical charts or heroic epics, but something stranger, more immediate. They read like correspondence tense, poetic and confrontational. These are the Enmerkar and Errata texts, a cycle of literary compositions that recount an ancient diplomatic standoff between Uruk, Sumer's proud city of kings, and a faraway rival named Errata. On the surface, it appears mythological. Messengers crossing vast mountain ranges, demands for tribute, gods invoked as mediators. But between the lines, these texts reveal something unprecedented for their time, a glimpse of the world's earliest diplomacy. At the heart of these texts is Enmerkar, a legendary king of Uruk and predecessor to Gilgamesh. He sends a messenger to the distant city of Errata, nestled in the mountains far to the east. His demand is clear. Errata must submit to the authority of Uruk and provide precious materials: gold, silver, lapis lazuli for the construction of temples honouring Inanna, the goddess of love and war. The ruler of Errata refuses. What follows is not war, but a battle of wills and words. Messages are exchanged, challenges offered, and divine authority invoked. One passage describes a crucial moment when the messenger, unable to remember Enmerkar's complex verbal message, begs for a new solution. In response, the king takes a tablet of clay, inscribes his demands in cuneiform, and sends it. The text declares, for the first time, the word was put on clay and sent. Its process, that moment may not be literal truth, but it captures something profound, the realization that human memory was no longer enough. Writing became diplomacy, and clay tablets became tools of international politics. These weren't just letters, they were acts of power, tokens of literacy, permanence, and authority that could travel where kings could not. The Enmerkar texts show how writing extended a ruler's voice across terrain and time, transforming communication itself into a weapon and a shield. For centuries, historians assumed Aratta was fictional, a poetic foil, a mythical city of wealth and pride, too grand to be real. But archaeological work in southeastern Iran began to challenge that assumption. In the early 2000s, excavations in the Halil River Valley near modern Jiroft revealed the ruins of an advanced Bronze Age civilization. There were monumental structures, complex irrigation systems, and most remarkably, thousands of chlorite stone vessels carved with scenes uncannily similar to Sumerian art, serpent-headed figures, scorpion men, horned bulls, celestial motifs. These weren't copies. They were part of an independent, sophisticated artistic tradition, one that clearly interacted with Mesopotamia, but also stood on its own. More evidence piled up. Chemical analysis of lapis lazuli, found in Sumerian cities, traces its origin to mines in Badakhshan. Afghanistan, well beyond Aratta's proposed location, but confirming the existence of a long-distance trade route through Iran. The same lapis appears in Jiroft contexts. Carnelian, another stone mentioned in the texts, comes from Gujarat in western India, but is found in both Mesopotamian and Jiroft sites. And the chlorite vessels unique to the Jiroft region have been unearthed in Sumerian cities like Ur and Kish. Goods were not just exchanged, cultures interpenetrated. The route described in the texts also aligns with this evidence. The Sumerian tablets place Aratta beyond 7 mountains. To the east, Jiroft lies just past the Zagros Mountains, nestled in a once fertile river valley. Climate data indicates that this region was wetter and more agriculturally productive in the 3rd millennium BC. The civilization there could have supported the kinds of craftspeople and artisans described in the Aratta texts. Trade wasn't a luxury, it was a lifeline, a web that connected people across impossible distances. The implications are stunning. This wasn't just story, it was early international relations. Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta were kings negotiating through messengers, writing, and divine diplomacy. Their story preserves the memory of a political rivalry across borders, a tension between two powerful urban centers, each claiming divine favor and cultural supremacy. In one scene, the Arattan ruler asserts that Inanna loves his city more than Uruk. In another, Enmerkar retorts with a counterclaim backed by religious authority. Even the gods are brought into the diplomatic duel. This isn't mythology as pure fantasy, it's political theatre encoded in epic form. Linguistic evidence deepens the mystery. The Arattan ruler is said to speak a different language, requiring a translator. this detail, once thought poetic, matches the archaeological record. Early inscriptions found in Ziggurats use Proto-Elamite or other undeciphered scripts. Distinct from Sumerian cuneiform, it suggests a multilingual world where scribes and envoys had to bridge cultural and linguistic divides using writing systems that did not yet share alphabets or lexicons, and still they found ways to communicate, to negotiate, to challenge and respond not with swords, but with tablets. Some scholars argue that these texts serve as origin myths for writing itself. The moment when the messenger fails to remember the king's message and a tablet must be made is not just a story, it's a recognition of a pivotal change in human cognition. Oral culture had reached its limit. Writing had to step in. And in this legend of Enmerkar, we see not only the invention of diplomacy, but the necessity of written record in conducting it, beyond errata. Other distant lands appear in Sumerian tablets Dilmun, Magan, and Meluha. Dilmun, likely modern Bahrain, was a hub for copper and pearls. Magan, perhaps the Oman Peninsula, provided diorite and high-quality metals. Meluha is widely accepted as the Indus Valley civilization, over 1,000 miles away. Sumerian scribes recorded goods from these lands: carnelian, ivory, timber, exotic animals. Administrative tablets from Ur list them by name, complete with shipping manifests and weights. This wasn't isolated contact, it was organized commerce, maintained across centuries. What the Enmerkar and errata texts hint at, the economic records confirm. Sumer wasn't just a cradle of civilization, it was the beating heart of the first global trade network. Clay tablets functioned like contracts, ledgers, diplomatic pacts. Trade goods came with seal impressions, verifying identity and terms. Kings may have fought with armies, but they also negotiated with messengers. And the proof of those conversations remains baked into the very clay that preserves their civilizations. And what of Arata itself? If Ziggurats is indeed its echo, then the city didn't simply vanish. It transformed from a rival to a myth, from a trading partner to a legend. When climate change, political shifts, or economic collapse took their toll, its name lived on not as a ruin, but as a symbol of a lost golden age, a time when cities across mountains and deserts spoke through clay. The Enmerkar cycle preserves this memory not in dry dates or royal annals, but in dialogue, in challenge, in the act of writing itself. In these lines, we see the birth of international diplomacy, the dawn of literacy as power, and the emergence of the scribe as a new kind of warrior, not wielding spears, but styluses, in the long, solemn parade of names that make up the Sumerian King List, an unbroken chain of dynasties stretching from myth to memory. Only one name disrupts the pattern like a thunderclap in a silent hall: Kubaba, the tavernkeeper of Kish, while kings before and after her are titled Lord, Warrior, or Son of God. Kubaba is introduced simply as a woman and a tavernkeeper, two statuses that, by all logic, should have placed her on the margins of society, not the throne. Yet there she stands, singular and unchallenged, recorded not as queen consort or regent, but as sovereign, and not for a fleeting moment, but for a century-long reign. Her entry in the king list reads, Kubaba, the tavernkeeper, who made firm the foundations of Kish, became king, She ruled for 100 years. It offers no justification, no explanation, and perhaps that silence is the most astonishing detail of all. For a civilization as ritualistic and hierarchical as Sumer, Kubaba's ascension seems impossible. Power flowed through patrilineal lines. Kingship was framed as divine and masculine, descending from heaven and passed from father to son. The king was the intermediary between gods and men, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the divine order. To imagine a woman, and one of common origin, rising to that position was to imagine a tear in the very fabric of Sumerian society. And yet, Kubaba's rule is not framed as an aberration or usurpation. It is presented in the same formal tone as the male kings. Her name appears in multiple versions of the King List across regions and centuries. Always feminine, always official. She is the exception that was never erased. But who was she? The term tavernkeeper in ancient Sumeria carried connotations far beyond pouring beer. Taverns were community hubs, places where labourers gathered, where deals were struck and disputes were settled. They were also viewed with suspicion spaces of loosened morals and unregulated interactions. The Code of Hammurabi, written centuries after Kubaba, contains several laws regulating tavern keepers, most of them women, warning of their potential to disrupt social order. Yet it is from this ambiguous profession, half matron, half subversive, that Kubaba emerged. We know from surviving administrative tablets that Kubaba's rule was not symbolic. Her name appears on legal documents, temple dedications, and trade records. She was not a mythic placeholder or a symbolic nod to female power she governed. She made firm the foundations of Kish, a phrase typically reserved for rulers who restore order after chaos, suggesting that she may have risen during a time of political crisis or dynastic collapse. Her 100-year reign, likely symbolic of stability rather than literal longevity, implies that she either founded a new dynasty or presided over a prolonged golden age. Kubaba's legacy, however, did not remain confined to political history. Over the next millennium, her memory transformed. By the 2nd millennium BC, her name appears not in king lists, but in hymns and invocations, no longer as a ruler, but as a goddess. Across Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia, Kubaba evolves into Kubaba, a mother goddess associated with sovereignty, protection, and fertility. Her cult spreads westward through the Hittite and Hurrian empires, and by the 1st millennium BC, she appears as Cybele, the great mother of Phrygia, who would become one of the most venerated deities in the Greco-Roman world. This metamorphosis from mortal woman to divine matron was not unique in Mesopotamian theology. Gilgamesh, too, was deified after his death. But the trajectory of Kubaba's transformation is more extraordinary because of its social implications. A woman who should have been erased by the patriarchal records was instead elevated, first remembered, then worshipped. As Cybele, she becomes the goddess of mountains, wild beasts, and fertility rites. In Rome, she is adopted as Magna Mater, the Great Mother, served by eunuch priests in ecstatic rituals, her cult sponsored by the Roman state. But behind the pomegranate and lion, behind the marble statues and incense, is the shadow of a woman from Kish who once poured beer for labourers and rose to govern a city. How do we explain this leap from ruler to deity? One theory holds that divinization was the only available cultural mechanism for remembering a woman who broke the rules too completely. Sumerian society, like most ancient hierarchies, had no script for female sovereigns. The only way to preserve her story was to lift her beyond the human. In doing so, later cultures reconciled her contradiction. If Kubaba could not be remembered as a legitimate woman ruler, she could be revered as a divine mother, a symbol of power that transcended gender and class. But another possibility is even more profound. Perhaps Kubaba was remembered and worshipped not despite her origins, but because of them. In a world of priest-kings and dynastic succession, her story offered something revolutionary, a model of power earned, not inherited, a tavernkeeper turned queen, a woman of the people who became the mother of kings and gods. Her elevation served as a kind of moral and cosmic rebalancing. Just as the flood washed away the old to make way for the new, Kubaba's rise could represent divine justice, a reminder that the gods could choose leaders from anywhere, even from behind the bar. The tablets themselves do not editorialize. They offer no clues about public reaction or societal upheaval, but in their silent inclusion of her name, they preserve something fragile and powerful, the memory of possibility. That for one shining moment, a woman not born of royal blood or temple pedigree sat on the throne and ruled well enough to be remembered. Her name etched in clay. Her reign marked not by scandal but by the restoration of order. That Kubaba is the only woman listed in the King List is both an honor and a warning. It proves that Sumerian civilization, at its heights, could imagine a different kind of ruler. But it also underscores how rare and quickly mythologized such a figure had to become. In later generations, Kubaba would no longer be spoken of as a ruler, but sung to as a goddess. Her earthly deeds were transformed into divine attributes, her human struggles into eternal symbols. But the clay remembers. Beneath the layers of hymn and cult, beneath the stone idols and Roman rituals, lies a name, Kubaba, the tavernkeeper, a woman who ruled, recorded not in poetry, but in accounting tablets and temple rosters. A woman who defied expectations so thoroughly that time itself had to reframe her story. Each time you glance at a clock, trace a circle, or measure an angle, you're engaging with the legacy of Sumer, a civilization that has long vanished into dust, yet whose numbers still govern the modern world. In ancient Mesopotamia, somewhere around 3000 BC, Sumerian scribes developed a mathematical system that defies the intuitive logic of modern arithmetic. Instead of base 10, which naturally mirrors our 10 fingers, they chose a more abstract, more powerful system, base 60. This was no accident of tradition or convenience. It was a deliberate choice rooted in functionality, cosmology, and symmetry, designed not just to count sheep or track taxes, but to mirror the very structure of the heavens. At first glance, base 60 might seem unnecessarily complex, but the number 60 is mathematically elegant. It is the smallest number divisible by the first 6 integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This made it an ideal framework for calculations involving fractions, which were central to Sumerian life. On clay tablets, scribes could divide rations, plot fields, and calculate taxes without cumbersome remainders. A system like this was not just practical, it was revolutionary. It allowed them to write numbers in place, value notation, use ratios with precision, and eventually to map the cosmos with uncanny accuracy. And map it they did. Among the thousands of surviving tablets, Many are not ledgers or legal documents, but mathematical exercises and astronomical charts. These were not primitive stabs at counting, they were complex equations, observations, and predictions. Some of the most startling evidence comes from a small clay tablet now known as Plimpton 322, dated to around 1800 BC. It contains a list of Pythagorean triples, sets of 3 numbers, where the sum of the squares of 2 equals the square of the third. What stuns historians is not just that these values appear, but that they are organized systematically, generated through mathematical principles far more advanced than anything attributed to the Greeks 1,000 years later. In fact, Plimpton 322 suggests that Babylonian scribes, heirs to the Sumerian tradition, had already discovered geometric rules that underlie trigonometry. But they did so without symbolic algebra or diagrams. Instead, they used number patterns within their base 60 framework. And because 60 is so highly divisible, they could express results as clean ratios that would be awkward or impossible in base 10. Their mathematics was not just about practicality, it was pure, abstract, and theoretical. They explored patterns because they saw them reflected in nature, in the heavens, and in their temples. Why would farmers and merchants need to understand right triangles or eclipse cycles? Because in Sumer, mathematics was sacred. The same ratios used to divide a field or distribute grain were used to align ziggurats with solstices and track the paths of Venus and the moon. The cosmos itself was a kind of divine machine, and numbers were the language of the gods. Priests were mathematicians. Temples were observatories. Time was divided not arbitrarily, but in alignment with celestial rhythms. The circle, for instance, was divided into 360 degrees. Another number derived from the Sumerian base 60 system. It corresponds almost perfectly with the number of days in a solar year, a natural choice for mapping the heavens. Each degree was further divided into 60 minutes, and each minute into 60 seconds units that still define modern navigation, astronomy, and timekeeping. This continuity is no coincidence. When Babylonian astronomers passed their data to Hellenistic scholars, and later to Islamic and European scientists, they preserved the sexagesimal system, the wristwatch, the compass, the GPS. These are Sumerian inventions in modern form. Even the zodiac reflects Sumerian innovation. The division of the sky into 12 signs, each covering 30 degrees, fits neatly within the 360-degree framework. Sumerian star catalogues contain early references to constellations we still recognize: Leo, Taurus, Scorpio. Their division of time into 12 months, each governed by a celestial house, embedded the rhythms of the cosmos into calendars and rituals. This wasn't symbolic astronomy, it was a functioning system of predictive science, refined over generations through painstaking observation. What makes this achievement more staggering is the method of transmission. The Sumerians had no printing press, no digital storage. Their knowledge survived on clay tablets, fragile yet durable, pressed with reed styluses and dried in the sun. And yet, this system endured through empires and upheaval, through floods and invasions. Each generation of scribes learned from the last, copying tablets, refining techniques, building on data. It was a cumulative tradition where knowledge was preserved through discipline, structure, and reverence. Some of their astronomical cycles could not be observed within a single lifetime, the precession of the equinoxes. For instance, a slow 26,000-year wobble in Earth's axis would require data stretching back centuries to detect, yet Sumerian records hint at such knowledge, encoded not in scientific prose, but in king lists, myths, and temple rituals. Perhaps the enormous lifespans assigned to antediluvian kings represent astronomical epochs, compressed into narrative form. Perhaps the flood, too, was not just a geological memory, but a symbolic reset of the celestial clock. Sumerian timekeeping reflected this cosmic logic. They divided the day into 12 double hours, each further broken into 30 units, a mirrored structure matching the zodiac and reinforcing the number 360. Their units of measure were flexible yet precise. For example, they defined a shah as 600 units, reinforcing base 60 multiplication across scales. These were not arbitrary metrics. They were rooted in observed phenomena and designed to harmonize with celestial cycles. Even in mundane tasks, Sumerian math showed refinement. Tablets describe calculations for irrigation, labor compensation, and architectural dimensions, often including verification steps or alternative methods. Scribes were trained in formal schools known as edubas, where they copied model problems and memorized tables of reciprocals, squares, and cube roots. This was not rote learning, it was a professional guild, preserving intellectual mastery over the physical and metaphysical world. And they did not keep this knowledge to themselves. Mathematical tablets were found not just in temples, but in private homes, merchant archives, and state buildings. It was a society built on numbers, on measured exchange, ordered time, celestial balance. Whether building canals or consecrating temples, the same system governed the task. In this way, Sumerian math was not just a tool, it was a worldview. That worldview lives on. When Renaissance clockmakers designed 60-minute hours, they borrowed from Babylonian astronomy. When engineers measure angles in degrees and minutes, they walk the paths first carved by Sumerian priests. The base 60 system, devised in mud brick cities 5,000 years ago, continues to shape our reality. We live by their numbers. We measure by their cycles. And when we speak the language of minutes, seconds, degrees, and arcs, we still speak the mathematics of the gods. In the quiet corners of ancient Ur, among tablets that count sheep and tally beer rations, another type of clay document emerges, one that traces the movements of copper across seas, carnelian across deserts, and lapis lazuli over mountains. These are the tablets of trade, lists and receipts that paint a stunning picture of a world far more connected than we might imagine for 5,000 years ago, long before the Roman roads or the Silk Road, long before maps named oceans and kingdoms. The Sumerians were conducting international commerce on a remarkably complex scale. 3 distant lands appear again and again in these tablets: Dilmun, Magan, and Meluhha. For the Sumerians, these names represented exotic, faraway places, a world of maritime trade, mysterious cultures, and foreign gods. Scholars now believe that Dilmun corresponds to modern Bahrain and parts of the eastern Arabian coast, Magan to the Oman Peninsula, and Meluhha almost certainly to the Indus Valley civilization, centered in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. These weren't just mythical lands, they were real. Thriving civilizations connected to Sumer through an intricate web of sea and land routes. From Dilmun came copper, pearls, and fine woods. From Magan, diorite, a tough black stone used in royal inscriptions and statues. And from Meluha flowed a stream of luxury goods, carnelian beads, elephant ivory, ebony, and spices. Sumerian tablets don't just mention these places, they include cargo manifests, weights, delivery logs, and customs records, revealing a system of trade both robust and highly bureaucratic. In a tablet from Ur, a scribe records receiving 20 talents of copper from Magan, while another lists Meluha wood for temple construction. These were not incidental exchanges, they were part of a permanent and vital economy. What makes this even more remarkable is the scale of distance. Meluha, for instance, was over 1,000 miles away from Sumerian ports, a journey across open sea and through political borders. Yet archaeological discoveries confirm the route. Indus Valley seals. Small, square, stamp-like stones with animal motifs and undeciphered script have been found in Mesopotamian cities like Ur, Kish, and Lagash. Conversely, Sumerian cylinder seals have turned up in Harappan cities like Lothal and Mohenjo-Daro. Chemical analysis of carnelian beads found in Sumerian graves shows they came from Gujarat, the same source region as many Indus Valley ornaments. This was not occasional or opportunistic trade. This was sustained interaction with established partners, shared standards, and coordinated exchange. The tablets record standardization in weights and measures, and mention merchant classes, shipping contracts, and even rudimentary insurance arrangements. It wasn't just about moving goods, it was about maintaining a network, protecting value, and ensuring reliability across borders. In some texts, we find mentions of sealed containers, marked with owner seals and tamper-proof indicators, a 5,000-year-old system of product verification and authentication. And it wasn't only raw goods that moved, ideas, beliefs, technologies, and even scripts likely crossed these routes. Artistic motifs from Indus Valley seals such as bulls, seated figures, and horned deities begin to appear in Mesopotamian art. Likewise, the Sumerian style of administrative tablets shows influence in peripheral regions. The sea didn't separate civilizations, it connected them. The Persian Gulf, in this period, was a commercial highway, lined with ports, warehouses, and merchant communities that spanned continents. Much of this trade flowed through the port city of Dilmun, which functioned as a middleman between Sumer and points further east. Tablets describe Dilmun as a place where cargo was consolidated, taxes collected, and shipments redirected. It appears both as a spiritual ideal, the land where the sun rises, and as a real administrative hub. Some Sumerian texts even claim that sickness and death were unknown in Dilmun, suggesting it was seen as a kind of commercial paradise, part spiritual, part logistical. Maritime archaeology is beginning to piece together the physical evidence of these routes. Along the Omani coast, researchers have found ancient smelting sites, slag heaps, and stone anchors, consistent with the production and export of copper during the 3rd millennium BC. In Bahrain, the remains of warehouses and settlements match the descriptions of bustling trade centres. At the Indus port of Lothal, a dockyard with sluice gates, the oldest known in the world, points to systematic shipping activity. The technology was there. So was the organization, and behind it all, clay tablets tracked every detail. These records also show the emergence of professional merchants, some tied to temples, others acting independently or in family guilds. They carried letters of credit, signed with cylinder seals, and often worked with scribes who could manage multilingual transactions. In one case, a tablet describes a merchant pledging collateral for a shipment to Magan, agreeing to repay the temple in copper upon return. These are the building blocks of international finance. 4. 000 years before the modern banking system, climate data adds another layer of insight. During the height of Sumerian trade, the Iranian Plateau and Gulf region experienced wetter conditions, supporting agriculture and settlement along the trade routes. But as rainfall patterns shifted and rivers shrank, some of these connections frayed. By 2000 BC, signs of decline appear. Fewer shipments, abandoned ports. The end of Meluhar references the world grew drier, and with it, the arteries of trade began to close. But while the networks may have withered, the knowledge endured etched in clay, sealed in containers, passed from one scribe to another. The scale of Sumerian trade challenges long-standing assumptions about early civilizations. We often imagine them as isolated bubbles, rising and falling in cultural solitude. But the tablets tell a different story, a world of economic interdependence, where decisions in Kish could ripple through Dilmun, Megan, and Meluhar, where a merchant in Ur might wait anxiously for a shipment from Gujarat, where the movement of goods was governed not by myth, but by contracts, seals, and timely delivery. This was not globalization in our modern sense, but it was its blueprint: trade-shaped diplomacy, religion, and even writing itself, the need to track cargo, credit, and responsibility helped fuel the development of cuneiform into a flexible, powerful system of record. In many ways, Sumer's trade routes were arteries of civilization, pumping goods, ideas, and knowledge across the ancient world. And at the center of it all stood the scribe stylus in hand, clay tablet before him, recording not just transactions, but the pulse of a planet quietly learning to connect itself. In the world of ancient Sumer, where identity, authority, and authenticity had to be proven not with signatures or biometric scans, but with clay and precision, one object reigned supreme: the cylinder seal, no larger than a man's thumb, carved from semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, serpentine, or hematite. These tiny tools were more than artistic marvels. They were the keys to power, the stamps of legitimacy, and the instruments through which civilization recorded itself. Each seal, when rolled across a soft clay surface, left a distinctive imprint like a miniature mural containing images, text, and often secrets that told who you were, what you owned, and what protection you carried from the divine. Every Sumerian adult who participated in formal society owned a seal. For merchants, it verified contracts. For priests, it authenticated temple records. For officials and kings, it affirmed decrees. Without a seal, a person could not conduct legal transactions, store goods, or send secure messages. In essence, the seal was your identity in stone, your voice when you were not present. The practice was so integral that even gods were believed to possess divine seals, some of which are described in mythic texts as tools that shaped reality itself. In this way, seals weren't just bureaucratic devices, they were sacred tokens, marrying the practical with the spiritual. But what makes Sumerian cylinder seals truly astonishing is the level of detail carved into such a small surface. Some seals, now housed in museums in Paris, Berlin, and London, display figures with individually carved fingers. Facial expressions, intricate clothing, and minute inscriptions all etched into stones harder than steel using tools that predate iron. Under magnification, the artistry defies belief. Wedges of cuneiform, each smaller than a grain of rice, form complete sentences. Bearded gods ride chariots across star fields no larger than a postage stamp. Celestial symbols appear in precise arrangements, 3-star alignments, crescents, and sun disks suggesting not just decoration, but astronomical coding. This has led some researchers to ask, how did they do it? Several seals contain elements so microscopically precise that they could not have been produced by the naked eye alone. The theory has emerged that ancient artisans may have used lenses or magnifying tools, perhaps crystal spheres filled with water or natural quartz lenses, to enlarge their field of vision. While no such lenses have yet been definitively found in Mesopotamian contexts, their existence has been proposed for other ancient cultures, such as Egypt and Minoan Crete. Whether aided by optics or not, the fact remains the skill required to produce these seals is as impressive today as it was 5,000 years ago. More than objects of beauty, these seals were part of a system of information and security. A sealed jar of grain or a clay-wrapped storage room could be trusted only so long as the seal impression remained unbroken. Once tampered with, the broken seal told all. Contracts, too, required seal impressions from every party involved. Some tablets contain up to 12 distinct seal marks, each rolled with care across the surface, like signatures in a modern legal agreement. A missing seal invalidated the document. Forging a seal was a serious crime, an early form of identity fraud and likely punishable by law or expulsion from temple service. But seals also carried spiritual weight. Many were engraved with personal prayers or the names of protective deities. One seal might read, "For Ninurta, may my name be remembered," while another might invoke Inanna to watch over the seal's bearer. These inscriptions weren't performative, they were part of the ritual protection that the seal offered. Some seals were buried with their owners, a kind of divine passport to the afterlife, ensuring identity even in death. Others were passed down through families, reused by descendants, or repurposed during temple ceremonies. The seal, in this way, was more than a tool. It was a spiritual artifact, infused with personal and cosmic resonance. Interestingly, seals also served a narrative function. When rolled across clay, a seal did not just mark ownership, it told a story. Scenes unfold from left to right. A worshipper led by a minor deity approaches a seated god. Lions are tamed beneath the feet of heroes. Heavenly bodies float above the heads of kings. These were compressed myths, portable theologies that revealed the values, fears, and beliefs of the bearer. Some are clearly astrological, the moon god Nanna surrounded by crescent moons and stars, or the goddess Inanna flanked by Venus symbols. Others depict scenes of judgment, combat, or creation. To carry a seal was to carry a cosmology in your pocket. As trade expanded and bureaucracy deepened, the demand for seals exploded. Seals of officials, merchants, priests, and royal family members have been found across Mesopotamia, from Eridu to Uruk to Mari. In fact, entire archives have been uncovered, clay tablets stored in rows, each with matching seal impressions, forming an early data storage system. In one case, a room excavated in ancient Ebla yielded over 15,000 clay tablets, many bearing seals from distant cities, evidence of complex political and economic networks. The seal, in these contexts, becomes more than personal. It is a stamp of institutional continuity, a symbol that a decision, once sealed, must be honoured. Cylinder seals also evolved with time and geography. Early seals were simple geometric patterns and single figures. But by the late 3rd millennium BC, during the Akkadian and Ura III periods, they became narrative masterpieces. The Akkadian seal of Ada, for example, depicts a multi-figure scene with the sun god Shamash rising between mountains, his rays beaming out like mathematical lines, both a myth and a celestial diagram. This blending of myth, astronomy, and authority is the hallmark of high Sumerian civilization, and the seal captures it in miniature. And yet, for all their technical brilliance and spiritual power, seals remained deeply human. They were chipped, worn, replaced. Some were lost and recarved, others were reused, with old inscriptions scratched away and new ones carved in. This palimpsest of use tells a story not just of kings and gods, but of daily life, of merchants waiting for ships, of scribes filing contracts, of builders signing temple walls. It tells us that even in a society ruled by divine order and cosmic mathematics, the tools of civilization were used, reused, and trusted by ordinary hands. The cylinder seal, then, was not simply a relic. It was a system, a fusion of legal security, religious belief, social identity, and technological mastery. It was both signature and prayer, both proof and protection. And in its rotating form, rolled across clay again and again, it mirrored something deeper, the cycles of time, the wheels of the heavens, the eternal turning of human endeavour. They may be small, but in every groove and line, in every god and star carved into stone. The cylinder seals of Sumer whisper a powerful truth. Nothing truly mattered until it was sealed. As the sun set over the ziggurats and palaces of Sumer, few would have imagined that the civilization that gave the world writing, kingship, and cosmic mathematics was nearing its twilight. Yet, within the same clay tablets that recorded temple offerings, trade deals, and royal edicts, we find the first whispers of unravelling, not in dramatic declarations or prophetic warnings, but in quiet notations, smaller rations, fewer shipments, halted construction. The Sumerians, meticulous chroniclers of their own greatness, also left behind the story of their slow collapse, written not with the drama of conquest, but in the sobering language of administration. By 2100 BC, Sumer had already endured multiple invasions, climate shifts, and internal power struggles. The Akkadian Empire, which had briefly unified the region under Sargon and his successors, had collapsed. Under King Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi, rose to become the last great Sumerian capital. Under their reign, temples were rebuilt, irrigation systems maintained, and trade networks re-established. But even these efforts couldn't hold back the tide. The third dynasty of Ur, or III was the final burst of Sumerian brilliance and its last gasp. Administrative tablets from this period reveal a society under increasing pressure. Extensive bureaucratic systems were in place to manage grain distribution, corvée, labor, military obligations, and temple rituals. But the volume of these records also betrays something else, a civilization straining to control decline through paperwork. We see scribes recording exact quantities of grain issued to temple workers. But the portions get smaller. There are complaints about missed quotas, absentee workers, delayed trade convoys. The center was holding, but just barely. Environmental data provides one crucial clue. Around 2200 BC, the Near East experienced a major drought, part of what climate historians now call the 4.2-kilo-year event. Rainfall decreased, rivers shifted, and salinization of irrigated fields rendered previously fertile land increasingly barren. This wasn't a short-term crisis. It was a long, grinding reduction in agricultural yield, which would have put tremendous strain on the temple economies that sustained Sumerian life. Temples didn't just serve gods, they were centers of storage, redistribution, and control. With less to redistribute, their authority weakened. At the same time, nomadic pressures from the west and east increased. The Amorites, Semitic-speaking pastoralists began migrating into Mesopotamian territories, sometimes peacefully, sometimes as raiders. Sumerian cities, which had been isolated, independent city-states for most of their history, struggled to coordinate a response. Walls were built, but garrisons stretched thin. In many cities, governors once loyal to Ur began to act independently, withholding tribute, hoarding supplies, and declaring autonomy. Some tablets show subtle administrative shifts. Documents previously signed by governors of Lagash or Nippur begin to omit royal names. Others are dated to local rulers rather than the king of Ur. It's in these small signs that the collapse becomes visible. Power fractured. The central archive grew quiet. Orders went unheeded. A system based on cooperation and cosmic order began to falter under fragmentation and scarcity. And yet, this wasn't a sudden fall. It was a slow fading, a turning away from what had once been inviolable. Cities like Ur, Eridu, and Uruk continued to be inhabited, but they were no longer centers of innovation. Ziggurats crumbled, not from conquest, but from neglect. The scribal schools still taught cuneiform, but fewer tablets were commissioned. Seals were still impressed, but now reused, their original owners forgotten. The gods remained in their shrines, but the offerings grew sparse. By 2004 BC, the end arrived with a whisper and a sword. The Elamites, from the mountains to the east, invaded Ur, the last king of Ur. Ibisin was captured and taken into exile. Sumerian political independence was gone, and with it, the last native dynasty of Sumer. But while the king was taken, the culture was not destroyed. The conquerors adopted much of Sumerian bureaucracy, language, and religion. The script, the myths, the mathematics they survived, absorbed into the Akkadian-speaking empires that followed, Babylon, Assyria, and beyond. Ironically, the preservation of Sumerian knowledge was possible because of the very thing that made their decline so visible, their obsession with writing. The same tablets that recorded temple income and beer rations also preserved hymns to Inanna, lists of star names, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Their archives, buried by time and collapse, became accidental time capsules, and when later cultures sought legitimacy, they reached back into those tablets for it. Babylonian kings copied Sumerian rituals. Assyrian astronomers updated Sumerian star charts. Even Greek and Roman scholars, centuries later, would work from knowledge passed down through the scribes of Sumer. So, what was the final secret hidden in the Sumerian tablets? Not just their rise, their myths, their gods, or their mathematics, but their resilience through record. They understood something many civilizations do not, that memory is survival, that even if the cities fall, even if the rivers dry and the fields salt over, the words pressed into clay endure. Fire cannot burn them, flood cannot wash them away. Time itself becomes their ally. In this, Sumer didn't vanish, it transformed. The Sumerian language continued as a liturgical and scholarly tongue for centuries. Temple schools in Babylon still taught cuneiform using Sumerian texts. Their myths became templates for all future epics. Their numbers, their calendar, their legal principles still alive in the bones of modern systems. The Sumerians were not forgotten because they refused to let themselves be. In every tablet, they recorded not just transactions, but truths, and in their quiet decline, they gave us a final gift, a mirror, a reminder that civilizations are not measured by how long they last, but by what they choose to remember, and what they leave behind for those still looking toward the stars.